and Events talk series here at the University of the West of Scotland. The theme for today's webinar session focuses on tourism, youth and care in the Global South. And we have a lineup of two fantastic speakers here with us today. Professor Marina Novelli from the Nottingham University Business School, and Dr. Rodney Westerleken. Sorry, Rodney, if I pronounced that incorrectly. I did my best. From NHL Steadily University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. So thank you very much to both of you. We appreciate that you're very busy, and obviously, Rodney, the time differences for you is also. We are very thankful for you to be here today and sharing your research with us. So I think we'll start first with Marina, who will be focusing on youth entrepreneurship in tourism for sustainable development in the Sub-Saharan Africa. And then we move on to Rodney, who would be discussing rethinking orphanage tourism in the post-COVID era. So two fantastic talks and really interesting, and I'm personally very much looking forward to hearing from you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this evening for me here in Bali. My presentation is about the rethinking of orphanage tourism in the post-COVID era. So I will be looking at voluntarism and how that old system of voluntarism, which I will explain how we can move to family-based care. So let me see, because now I also want to go to my next slide. Yeah, there we go. So my name is Rodney Westerleken. As Masoud already said, I'm working for NHL Steadily University of Applied Sciences in Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. Even though I live in Bali, Indonesia, I'm doing a postdoc research at the moment, focusing on the effects of COVID-19 on tourism and hospitality related communities, with a big case study that we started in 2020, and we're running it till 2030 on the socio-economic effects of COVID on communities. Next to that, I'm also the editor-in-chief of Research and Hospitality Management. So if you're considering publishing, then please consider our journal. Masoud is also one of our reviewers, and also our former editor-in-chief, Erwin, is in the room. So please do consider. Besides that, I'm running my own foundation here in Indonesia, Westerleken Foundation, where we focus on alternative care, on reunification of children that are living in institutions, and the issue of orphanage tourism and all that comes around it, basically to stop that. Besides that, I'm also setting up things with Tshwane University in Perth, working with Erwin on some nice and engaging projects in the future as well. So, as I said, living here in Bali quite almost 20 years now, and since 2009, I'm involved in research into that world of orphanages. So I'm always looking at that intersection of tourism, child welfare, but also crisis resilience and how they impact each other. As I said, doing this longitudinal study, and the outcomes of that study combined with my PhD that I finished in 2020, which was really focusing only on Bali and why children are institutionalized and how that is in line or not in line with standards, global standards for children, but also national laws. And those two studies actually overlap a lot. So if we're looking at the pre-pandemic situation, then on Bali, especially after the terroristic attacks, 2002 and 2005, we saw rapid tourism growth, and with that, an increased foreign donation and volunteer flow. People that came to Bali want to spend longer time on Bali because Bali is relatively cheap. It's a beautiful island, and people are friendly. And a lot of people want to do something good. They see poverty, they see the need for change, and think that it's good to donate or to volunteer for a while. And because of that, we saw an emergence of unlicensed orphanages just building up. And those orphanages are using children to actually attract donor funding, to attract volunteers, to actually create a kind of human zoo where foreigners can come, visit, see children like monkeys in the zoo, donate, leave again, and the next volunteer or donator comes in. And with that, creating a business and actually making children commodities of or marketing tools of that orphanage. And usually those are not children that are orphans like Annie from the movie. These children usually still have parents and families. So what we see is that there is a lot of family separation, often because of economics, just so not due to orphanhood. And in Indonesia, we do have a very good national standard since 2011 that is really clear and really giving very clear standards, among others saying that children that have families should never be institutionalized, that reasons of economics or access to school, to education is not a reason to be institutionalized, and that foundations behind an orphanage should actually help those families to prevent family separation. And for example, if school is too far away, not take those children, put them in an orphanage, but actually provide transport from that village towards the school that is actually too far away. In practice, we see doesn't work that way. Orphanages do want to have those children inside at any cost. So even getting them from faraway islands within the archipelago, just for the sake of having those children to have sad stories to tell, to use them as a marketing instrument. So what we also see is that tour operators and also NGOs are offering volunteer with children packages, and really for their own benefit, for their own gain, not for those children themselves. So with that, we see donor visibility through social media, especially in the last 10 years. We see big growth of content on social media showing children, showing sad stories, showing appeals for funding, just because it's such an easy outlet. And during COVID, that also grew. And globally, we see that 80% of the children that are living in orphanages actually have at least one parent alive. My research in my PhD research actually showed that that number is even 92% in Bali. So 92% of children have at least one parent alive, where 76% of children have both parents still alive. So there is a system dependency. There is the foreign funding, there is the survival of the institution. And because of that, what do you need? Children. So there is a lot of recruitment going on. And that goes even into, I see that your motorbike is broken, or I see that your house needs a new roof. We're giving your child a scholarship. Your child is your retirement fund. So come with us within the boarding house, because usually they don't want to use the orphanage, and we fix your roof and we give you a new motorbike, and by that the orphanage has another child with another story to tell. So we also see that cycle on social media, so exposure coming from that, the donor attention, it's attracting new donors, other people that think, oh, this is such a bad situation, so sad, here I give some more money, and with that gain institutional income. And volunteers are often also very unaware of the regulations and the ethical implications of it. And basically, there is a very simple thing to say. If you're not allowed to work with children in your own country, why would you be allowed to work with children in another country of which you don't speak the language, which you don't know the culture? Just because you're a white savior doesn't mean that it's right to do that. And then the institutions became dependent on the constant inflow of those tourists and those volunteers, which changed during COVID-19. So there is an economy of care that is linked directly to that tourism. So before COVID-19, we already saw the signs of unsustainability. So we saw that model that functioned on the short-term funding. And the short-term is very important because a volunteer comes 1 month, sometimes only a week or a day, is out again, the next one comes in. So there's not much time for big complaints or big cases. And the focus is never on the child itself or the needs of that child. Besides that, there is a little government oversight, especially of the unlicensed orphanages. And then there are the instances of neglect and abuse that already showed up here and there. And then the question that I asked in my PhD research, so who are those children and why are they actually here? What is the mechanism behind that? Then COVID-19 came. So on Bali, tourism collapsed overnight. But with that, also the donations declined sharply for those orphanages. So many of the institutions that were always benefiting from all those tourists and volunteers coming in, they suddenly had severe financial pressure. And to survive, they started to do online performances. You could call with a child under the idea, you can talk with them so they can still practice their English, or you can just help them up a little bit because they missed the volunteers and they missed the tourists coming. And even then, shows were happening online. And the orphanages try that to just maintain that visibility that they usually would get through volunteers that were posting online. But of course, with posting like that, there is a huge risk as well, because people with wrong intentions, such as pedophiles, they know exactly where to go, which children are there. Usually the stories, the privacy of those children are exactly being told. This child has been abused. That's why it came to the orphanage. Or this child is like this child's like that. They're showing bedrooms. They're showing where the bathrooms are. So actually, somebody with wrong intentions can already survey which place to go and what are the corners that are not entirely visible by other people. So during COVID, also the government, they restricted new admissions to orphanages to prevent virus spread. So what we saw is that also the amount of stories, of new stories, was building down. And on one hand, we saw spectacular stories about existing children in the orphanages appearing. On the other hand, we saw a slowdown as well. And more people started to be aware of the dependency and child safety within those institutional settings. So people started also asking, if there are no volunteers going there anymore, but the institution can still run as it should be, why actually do they need volunteers? And started to be aware that those volunteers were actually only there to bring in money, and in return for that, were given time with the children to play and to teach English, for example, while that was actually not a necessity. Then we saw that public and donor perception began to shift, and people started asking more and more questions. So there was more and more online exposure as well that revealed those problematic fundraising practices, and also focused on privacy risks. More and more people started to be aware, possibly also because we all had more time on our hands during COVID, what is actually going on here. So the local discourse expanded around family reunification. These children have parents, so why are they not going back to their parents? What are the regulations around this? So then we entered the post-COVID era. So after 2022, we saw a gradual tourism recovery. And last year in Bali, we had more tourist arrivals than before COVID. But the ethical awareness remained. People were more skeptical, more critical on the orphanages and asking more questions. When you would go to Facebook forums, for example, on traveling to Bali, you could see more discussion happening. Usually there would be someone asking, "Oh, I'm looking for a good orphanage to bring this and this and this," and people would come in with a lot of orphanages, some of which I thought, well, if you're asking for a good orphanage, I will always say there are only one or two out of 360 orphanages in Bali that I could possibly recommend, but then definitely not those that are listed now. What we saw after COVID is that there was more discussion, and people say, "Oh, well, orphanages are not good. Orphanages are not a place where children actually should be." Then the institutionalization itself, that was increasingly questioned by also the government, but also the civil society. More and more cases start showing up because the discussion was going on more and more about, for example, abuse within orphanages. And people started questioning, well, if abuse is happening and more cases are coming to the surface, also because of social media, is this the right place for children to be? So we saw recognition there where volunteer presence was not essential for the daily operations, and that if you're not having any license to work with children, it's basically not a place that you should go to. But also the voices of the children themselves, which became also more vocal, that they're actually not happy to be observed within the orphanage. And they felt like being monkeys in the zoo and having to entertain all the time for every guest that is coming in, singing the same song, sit on the same lap. Well, actually, you just want to play with your ball or puzzle, or you need to do your homework. So what we learned is that COVID-19 exposed that the system is fragile and depending on tourism and on foreign goodwill. So that also, as a tourist, as a foreign tourist, you have a possibility to do something about it. It highlighted the contradictions between charity narratives and also what a child needs and the rights of a child. And with that, it reinforced the principle that poverty itself should not justify family separation, that families, where possible, should always stay together, and that the family unit is the most important unit for a child to grow up in. So, what we should do when we should look at voluntarism, and we should reevaluate that critically with child protection frameworks. And then we should shift from institutions where children are living to more community and family-based programs. And NGOs should be focusing on preventive assistance. So education on health and micro support or microfinancing of small businesses for families. And the tourism sector themselves, they need to engage ethically through the, for example, education partnerships, and stop doing orphanage visits as a part of their program. It's not the right thing to do. So if we're looking at the post-COVID era, then we need to keep creating that awareness for that reform. We also need stronger enforcement of those national standards. And we need to make sure as educators as well that we educate our students on this issue. Students are aware of this issue and can make ethical decisions in their professional life after graduating. And then there should be more collaboration between government and NGOs, but also us as academics. So what we need is longitudinal monitoring of those family-based outcomes and how that can go hand in hand with ethical tourism transitions and moving away from visits to orphanages. But what do we see right now? Well, children are not tourist attractions, first of all, and more people start to be aware. But we also see that the practice of volunteering trips to orphanages is restarting. And that's something that's happening more or less in the past year, where we see more and more requests popping up again on social media. I want to go to an orphanage. I want to spend a month in an orphanage. So what is very important for us as educators, as academics, or just society, we need to keep telling this narrative. We need to stay critical, and we need to every time assess whether this is the best solution for a child to go into an orphanage. And there are certain cases where that is the best solution, but not on a wide scale, like 360 orphanages on 5 million people living in Bali. So that was the message that I want to give for today. If you want to know more, you want to see more of the research that I have done, please get in contact. This is my email address. More than happy to talk further and see where opportunities lay to work together on this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rodney. That was fascinating. I don't know, Sandro, are we just taking questions and comments at the end? Is that what we're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's better, Masood.
Okay. So we'll take some questions and comments at the end, Rodney, if that's okay. But thank you so much for that. It was fantastic and really, really interesting. Marina, would you like me to share the slides? And then if you tell me when to change, then I can do that for you.
Yes, please, because obviously there is something wrong on my side.
No.
Brilliant. Well, my talk kind of links up to what Rodney just talked about. And as you will see from the cover, the geographical area is different. Are you managing, Masood?
Yes. Can you see that now?
Yeah, perfect. So if you can share share it rather than having the preview. Yeah. I think it's coming. Well, my work, I don't know how many of you are familiar with my work, but if you go to the second slides, you will see that most of my work is very much about tourism and development in global south destinations. And interestingly, Rodney, your call for research, if you see on the bottom right-hand side, there is my latest book, which was written with a former PhD student of mine on the business of poverty in Africa, a travel philanthropy perspective, which very much calls upon a more critical assessment of what travelers philanthropy is all about. And of course, the issue of volunteering fits under that umbrella of travelers philanthropy. So, and interestingly, what I'm about to talk with you today is somehow indirectly related to what issues we are encountering in youth and care in global south destination, particularly when looking at alternative ways to do tourism and do good tourism, if we want to use that term. Next slide. So most of my work has really had tourism as a force for good change in Africa and beyond. I've also worked in Asia in the past, but as most of my academic identity has looked at working with youth in over 50 destinations and 27 countries in Africa. And so I have acquired a broad perspective of what somehow is coming together as a pattern, and the pattern of understanding what constitutes good tourism from a decolonized perspective, particularly when responsibility lies both in those traveling to destinations, which very often are people coming from global north destination. I don't like to say Western white tourists, because we've got a growing segment of tourists coming actually from India, from China, from Asia, broadly, particularly in Africa. And so that is actually shifting as an imagery. And of course, the research that I'm referring to today, next slide, please, is very much reflecting on work that I've done over the last few years, next slide please, on the role of tourism in creating opportunities for youth and youth in its broader terms, because what appeared to me over the last probably 10 years is that a lot of attention had been placed on pushing for empowerment through tourism, primarily focused on women. But what actually appeared to be an issue, growing issue, was that a lot of youth, male youth, were getting forgotten in process. And so particularly in destinations like Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, where I've been working extensively over the past 5 years, it appeared that there were a lot of misconception about what empowerment and fair empowerment could mean, and therefore how we would address those issues. So building on work I did in the Gambia, for instance, which is this peer-to-peer international approach, and so peer-to-peer capacity building approach, I developed a program of work, next slide, which fed into the British Council Innovation for African University program, which delivered a program on accelerating youth entrepreneurship and innovation for sustainable tourism in Africa in collaboration with Sub-Saharan University from Kenya, the Sustainable Travel and Tourism Africa from Kenya too, and then University of Ghana Business School and Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa. And what this project really much highlighted, interestingly, was the need to actually start really looking into a gap. And the gap was that we were potentially, next slide, please, looking at next slide, please, at having a challenge where while in a pre-pandemic and post-COVID tourism landscape of Africa, we looked at I would say, potentially growing youth. Obviously, the impact of COVID we all know about, but there was an employment challenge which was related to the fact that tourism jobs are mostly low-paid, seasonal, and unskilled, and there were limited career opportunities. And so what we were actually ending up was to have a lot of graduates in tourism, hospitality, events, and obviously technical and vocational education programs, which were either unemployable, unemployed, or they were going to seek jobs elsewhere, pretty much. In fact, during COVID, as we all know, a lot of people working in the sector moved to other sectors. Next slide, please. So the research question that really became poignant at that point was, are we producing a generation of tourism graduates which are underemployed, unemployable, or seeking employment elsewhere? And how we were going to address this. But as I was developing my new research program, which fed into the Leverhulme International Fellowship, which I've been working on from January 2024 until last June, I had to extend the catchment of the research into issues pertaining, for instance, youth, what we call it waithood youth, meaning people which are between a primary, secondary school and either going to university, or for those who could afford going to college and university, and actually those who were basically left into a permanent position of waithood. And of course, next slide, what happened was that through the Leverhulme Trust International Fellowship, which obviously built on collaboration with Judy Kefagona and Dr. Sifolo from Tshwane University, what we really looked at, how could we kind of map and deconstruct also myths and misconceptions that existed in the marketplace, particularly in destinations like South Africa and Ghana, where the problem generally speaking, particularly if you look at the literature, was somehow caused by, let's say, demand-driven factors, like, for instance, tourists asking for all-inclusive resort type of holidays, or tourists from global north destination looking for safari holiday rather than the wider cultural and environmental type of holidays. And actually kind of delve into which were the most structural changes that were happening at destination level. Next slide. So effectively, what happened during the research that was conducted over 2 intense periods of research, the purpose was also to actually try and understand whether it was, let's say, a global north induced problem or actually was a widely spread problem. And interestingly, what appeared was that although very often we assume that a lot of the unsustainable tourism practices, some of which are the volunteering, some of which are the I don't know, all-inclusive or safari type of practice, which are associated with Western white tourists, was broadly becoming practices adopted by the wider masses. So this was actually required, actually a step change also in the perception of what tourism in Africa is all about, right? And how it's perceived from outside and from insiders. Next slide, please. So one more, please. So effectively, we looked at specific contexts. So for instance, we tried and looked at already studied contexts like Soweto in Johannesburg, which is a community-based, where a number of community-based activities had been promoted and developed. And also equally, on the other side, in Kenya, we looked at it from a coastal Kenya perspective. So we had a kind of urban and rural setting. Although then my research, although I don't talk about it in depth here, expanded also into Masai Mara to have a rural kind of safari setting as well, and have a three-legged approach in looking at geographical context. And what happened, next slide, was that through this research, what clearly emerged was that in recognition of the fact that the growing numbers of youth were being increasingly acknowledged, the real question was that if we had these 830 million youth coming up as the future of Africa as a continent, the question was very clear, and was about, are we actually ready for this transformation that could be actually implemented through African youth-led interventions? And of course, you know, with digital disruption being very much at the forefront of what's happening in Africa, I mean, look at what has been happening, for instance, in Kenya at the moment through the Gen Z-led protest, which is very much the result of digital disruption, because the call for action has been really much pushed by digital innovation, social innovation and digital innovation. And then the second question is like, are we preparing these youth and young minds to actually challenge the challenges and opportunities in ahead? And actually, as I move forward, I realized that actually myself, despite having worked in this environment for a long time, I had my mindset completely skewed towards, you know, the fact that the assumption was that the answer would be no, when in actual fact, the answer was absolutely yes. And their evidence, move forward, please, next slide. The evidence were actually there, and we're becoming more and more effectively part of the tourism product as well. So, you know, as I write here, I've watched young entrepreneurs in Diani launching circular economy startup, Previously to it, I had experience in Masai Mara, women building jewelry out of discarded mosquito repellent bottle left behind by tourists. And this was 10 years ago, before we even started talking about circular economy approaches. So effectively, change is happening. So what we need to do is to actually have infrastructure that can actually support the growth of this education system that work in this particular advanced situation, and obviously job market that can absorb and provide careers. So next slide, please. So the barriers that were obviously effectively there were obviously in terms of the research setup in which us academic were operating. So for instance, even working with organizations like Tshwane University of Technology, which is a technical university based in Pretoria, with actually two other campuses, one being in Mpumalanga, which is near Kruger National Park, so at the doorstep of where tourism happens. So every graduates graduating in adventure tourism and sustainable tourism end up working in the sector directly at their doorstep. What emerged was that even in that setting, there was somehow a misconception about what sustainable tourism would be. There was a misconception about what really the sector would need. And therefore, what we've been trying to do is to revise the curricula in a way that can address those myths and misconceptions. So one of the advancements was in collaborating on looking at it from an advanced research point of view at higher education level, feeding into technical vocational education sector in South Africa. But also, next slide, what happened was that we looked at other activities, like, for instance, non-formal educational system, like the one provided by Sustainable Travel and Tourism Africa Young Change Maker program, which is a program developed and produced by STTA Kenya, and that actually work with 9 universities across Kenya to actually provide technical advancement and knowledge to graduates and graduates to actually get a job into tourism and actually be aware of what are the key themes around the issue of sustainability in tourism in Africa. Next slide, please. So through, let's say, creative processes, what we did do is to create systemic changes in the way, not only from our perspective, from, let's say, a global north, expert perspective, but also from a locally engaged perspective, we could have a mutually beneficial understanding and share of knowledge that would lead to young change makers approaches in how youth could actually not only benefit from learning practice and learning spaces, but also could feed into it. So what happens is that through the Rising Star scheme that the STTA Young Change Maker program launched, is actually a process through which we're trying to push for former graduates, those who actually had the opportunity to build a career, to come back and become mentors and share their experience and actually give that opportunity to other youth. And although this might seem quite obvious as an approach, in practice, in the context in which we were working, it wasn't that obvious at all. Right? So effectively, we had a lot of changes happening in terms of even mindset of those involved in the program. Next slide, please. So now, obviously, there are a number of other additional outcomes, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. Next slide. So as I said, the project led us through networking to actually venture out in other spaces like Masai Mara, where we worked with National Conservancy Cultural Training Center, which is a center of excellence, which is in development at the doorstep of the main gate of Masai Mara. Totally, let's say, embedded, and is the first conservancy in Kenya actually developed and implemented by Maasai community members. And what happened was really interesting, because going back to that question about creating workforce, which their aspiration is to go either and work elsewhere or actually in others end up being employed or unemployed. It was interesting because after a couple of sessions I did with the students there, one of the students, the quote that is in this slide, was quite another inspirational aspect about the fact that their mindset was geared up in having an aspiration of leaving their community. So their aspiration would be to go and work in Dubai, to go and work in the Middle East, because the perception is that they would be better paid, when in actual fact, the issue would be probably problematic as in Masai Mara. Next slide. So the other issue that we obviously became very kind of exposed to, and that is where the care for the youth needed to shift towards understanding the local dynamics, was when in Kenya, and this links a lot to what Rodney said before, in my assessment of working with this with a number of beach vendors, beach boys. So beach boys, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, are very often men and women, so beach boys and beach girls, who actually seek encounters with Muzungus, generally speaking, white middle-class travelers, to engage in romance tourism or else, or other aspects. And so in my research, it became evident that the mindset that had been formed in those particularly who were engaging in these type of activities emerged from issues related to travel philanthropy, where a lot of them had experienced white encounters with white people primarily in their school days, so primary school days generally, and their mindset had been geared to the fact that their aspiration in life was to find a Muzungu who would take them out of their misery. So, and this is a quote from one of my respondents. So effectively, when we talk about shifting mindset and trying to understand how we can shift these behaviors and make people understand that it's not okay to actually go to local schools, like Rodney saying, and treat these kids as a human zoo, or even in the best of intentions, using travel philanthropy vehicles to feel better about ourselves, or in actual fact, there are consequences that will then emerge in the youth days, particularly around the age between 25 and 30, when psychologists say that is the full formation of our ability to judge what the future of our lives would be. So again, a lot to think about there. And then next slide, please. Is one of the other things that I got involved in was actually to do a full assessment. I was invited by the Kwale County to actually write a report emerging from some of my consultation on how do we make sure that we can accelerate business innovation in Kwale. And I would like to say one of the key aspects was the issue of sustainability being perceived and portrayed still in 2025 in the wrong way. So, for instance, some of my respondents said that their tour rep in the all-inclusive resorts was telling them not to venture out of the resort because it was dangerous, or not to speak to the beach vendors because they were going to be harassed. So we're going back to discourse that we were having in sustainable tourism development and management 20 years ago, when we were talking with the First Choice, TUI, and all these organizations pushing mass tourists to those destinations. But what is happening now with the arrival of new tourists, like the Polish, the Lithuanians, the Chinese, the Russians, who are the new markets, effectively what we are seeing is the replication of models which we have been trying to investigate and address in the past, but is actually reproposing as one of the problems. So this was one of the major findings of this study. Now, to conclude, if you go to the next slide and the one after, Some of the strategic reflections that came very much forward from what obviously the work highlighted is that the major challenges that we were looking at, please go to the next slide, was that we needed to look at a pathway for inclusive tourism development. And it was evident that with such a big youth being at stake here, both as beneficiaries of tourism and potential developer of tourism, the problem of governance and policy becomes more and more poignant here. And although most of the policies in South Africa and Kenya and Ghana and all those countries talk about youth as the future of sustainable development in those countries, when it comes to the actual implementation of this, they're obviously lagging behind. And I mean, I go against my own interests, but there is also a responsibility in a lot of international consultants who have been advising on issues of sustainable development and effect what they've been doing in replicating very often models which don't work because they are like using blanket approaches that are shifted from one destination to the other. So empowerment, equity, and decolonial praxis becomes more and more fundamental. And when I talk about decolonial praxis, you know, this is a responsibility that lies on both sides of the coin. The visitors, the host community, and of course, whoever is in having that colonial mindset still in place. Next slide, which is my last slide, is about, you know, investment in the success of youth, is about private sector to partner for progress. And when we talk about a partner for progress, you know, today, you know, I sit on committee like World Economic Forum, Global Future Council for experience and lifestyle economy and sustainable tourism. And it is obvious that we need to integrate cross-sector expertise, but also, most importantly, remove the barriers. You know, we're still talking about barriers. And if the barriers, you know, interestingly, you know, some people may say, oh, well, digital disruption might constitute a barrier. Well, 10 years ago, I was in a village in Tanzania in the middle of Ngorongoro crater. And yet, when I asked one of my collaborators how we could communicate and share visual material, I mean, one of the local tour operators, who was a Tanzanian Maasai, had a better mobile phone than mine, right? And so effectively, we were contributing. So what I'm trying to say here is like we need to shift some of those mentality which are linked to tourism approach, to pity approach, and more like looking at those the future of tourism in Africa in the hands of advanced players, which are highly skilled youth and highly skilled workforce that needs an opportunity to actually build a career in the sector. I'm going to stop there. And the next slides is more like a thank you. And if people want to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop here and stop sharing. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you so much, Marina. That was fascinating. I tried to write as many comments as I can for myself, but it was excellent. And I think to both of you, that's a great example of doing proper ethnographic research. You know, not what we call anyone doing an interview, we call it ethnographic, but actually being there and experience it for yourself. So that was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. So
I didn't mention something, Masood. That included walking 12 kilometers a day on the beach in 42 degrees Celsius, right?
There you go. That's what we call proper ethnographic research. Thank you so much. So I think, Sandra, what's happening in the chat? Because I haven't been monitoring that. Do we have questions there, or Should we take
We do have a couple
questions?
of questions and comments there. I think there is one for a couple of comments for Rodney first. There is a
Okay.
couple of comments for so Marina as well. So if you want to take just, we can extend for another 5-10 minutes if people want just to answer the questions.
Okay, great. I think we've got someone's raised. Koki online is raised the hand. So maybe like if we just take that first, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate that. I am from Kenya, a lecturer at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University around Lake Victoria. I am a member, and we are members of Sustainable Tourism Agenda, a very, very innovative and very informative group. My question is about our Kenyan education tourism curriculum. Because one of what Professor has done, in fact, I really appreciate your presentation, Prof. You have really gone in depth to actually refer to a number of areas in Kenya where tourism touches on. The bottom line of all that you have presented, and my question is revolving around that, is about the curriculum, tourism curriculum. We have about over 30 public universities, plus several private universities. And each of them have a different tourism curriculum. And there is nowhere, except maybe through groups like Sustainable Tourism Agenda, which could actually now bring these graduates together and give them a common direction in terms of where to go in relation to tourism. How do we work together so that we ensure the products that is coming out of this learning institutions of higher learning would actually be more or less having the same skills? Because the curricula are different, very, very different from each other. Thank you.
Well, this is certainly one of the issues that has emerged very clearly. I mean, I've been working in Kenya for the past 10 years now, and we've had conversation at government level, obviously, but and that's where actually some of the recommendations that are coming out of this project will be transferred via STTA, which is one of the reasons of working with local implementing organization and champions in the destination to try and send the message. Now, the barriers that we found is kind of what I would say implicitly refer to the fact that a lot of the development project for sustainable tourism are very much looking at product development rather than addressing the substantial challenges that destination may have. And this is not necessarily only for Kenya. This is like very general practice across the globe. So effectively what we would need to do, and this is probably a call that needs to come from universities in Kenya, both public and private, to actually come together and request a review of the curricula. And then, of course, organizations like STTA Kenya, people like myself who have obviously done this in other destinations, could certainly support that process, right? In kind of formalizing and obviously kind of mapping and updating the curricula. I mean, when we did a simple exercise funded by UNESCO about over 10 years ago, where we had to revise the TVET curricula for the Nigerian, in Nigeria. In Nigeria, until about 10 years ago, they were still using the colonial British curricula for silver service in hospitality, right? I mean, on some of the hospitality training was how to cook a deer, right? How many deer can you find in Nigeria now, right? So again, it's about, and I know that is not the case in Kenya, because Kenya has been updated, particularly with the Watali College receiving quite a lot of funding for doing these kind of things. But then again, what is missing is the shared practice between Kenya to Kenya collaboration and understanding that although you are competing with each other to recruit students like any university in the world, the bottom line is that there has to be a codified approach to the delivery of tourism curricula. And if you don't have that, who is going to kind of suffer from it are your graduates, because you're going to produce graduates who are not going to be employable. And so that's a responsibility, a joint responsibility, at governance level, but also a practitioner level, where university academic senate should actually talk to each other and say, we need to do something about it, and look at tourism as one of the key pillars of the national strategy in Kenya. And that's why it's one of the priorities that should be addressed. I don't know if you answered your question, but I hope you did.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you so much. Any other questions online? I can't really see a lot of questions. There's a lot of comments, and I can see that there are a few for you, Rodney, and I think you can engage. You have already engaged with them. I can see that, but I don't know if there are any other questions online for our speakers today that you wanted to ask. Okay, maybe I can.
There's a clear consensus that was brilliant. So yeah, so it's that's good to see on the chat. Clear consensus.
I know. I think it was nice to see a clear link between the two talks. So it was really good.
And if somebody wants to get in touch after, then feel free. My email address is in the slides. I will share them to you as well to share with whoever is interested. Get in touch if you have a question after, or you're not feeling comfortable to ask it straight away. It's a controversial subject, so yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Regis is asking, is putting his hands up. Maybe we can let him the last question, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely,
Regis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marina and Rodney. Yeah, Rodney, I have a question for you. One thing which I'm not understanding it is the issue of having orphans as tourists. Ethically, how does it really work? I saw in the presentation, yes, you said no, orphans should not be tourists, but ethically, how do people in the community receive it? How do people view that practice of tourists coming to see children who are actually disadvantaged? And it was actually surprising as well to see that most of these kids, they are not really orphans. They are just coming from economic hardships. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. In my experience during my research, this was actually one of the topics that I focused on as well, that local perception of the orphanage and what's going on there, as well as peer pressure, for example, from surrounding communities, also where from source communities, because we always see hotspots where children are coming from. It's usually the same kind of villages. What we see is a kind of fear, a kind of power. And as my PhD was in cultural studies, so I've been looking a lot on the issue of power and the issue of influence, where we see that basically due to those tourists coming there and those foreigners coming there, surrounding communities see that as a kind of endorsement as well. Oh, if even the Westerners want to go there, then it must be right what they are doing. And it's only when things are coming to the surface. For example, 2 years ago, I closed down an orphanage in Bali with 100 children, where more or less 10 to 15% of the children inside were sexually abused by volunteers that were living inside of the orphanage. And only when it was closed down and when there was a police investigation, then the surrounding community only dared to really speak their mind and said, yeah, things were happening. It was strange. There was a lot of corruption. Like that kind of stories only came out. Before we started to close the orphanage down, we would also speak with the surrounding community. And they will always say, oh yeah, it's good, and it's a good place for children, and they're helping, always with a fear, because they know there is a lot of money there. There are white people going there, so there must be something happening that's good. There's support, so you better keep silent about it. I hope it answers your question. Actually, I could speak for hours on it.
Yeah. Can I add something to that, actually?
Please.
Regis, sorry, you were saying something, Regis.
Thank you, Marina. Yes, I wanted to actually even check when it comes to child trafficking. Does it really not cause as well this child trafficking? You know, when we have now tourists coming in and these kids, they are actually coming from they are being separated from their parents. Does it not promote child trafficking? Are there no cases that have been recorded in these orphanage places of child trafficking?
Yeah, we in Indonesia we do see cases of child trafficking, though not so much. I do think as well, when tourism is in place, so the mechanism of tourism, those orphanages that are using children as commodities will be aware of trafficking as well. They would not want that to happen, because they know there is a big magnifying glass on them by all those tourists that are coming in and are feeling attached to children, because they're selling sponsorships and they're selling sad stories. So within this part of Asia, that doesn't happen that much. Plus, because we're all islands, trafficking becomes quite a bit more difficult than on mainland, for example.
Can I just add to that, because I think there is a fundamental issue, and I don't know if Regis, if you come from an Asian or African perspective, I'm not sure, but my experience of looking into this subject, because at the root cause of the problem, is it goes into tourist behavior and community behavior. If I look at the African setup, right, and I look at when I visited, let's say, 20 plus years ago, the first remote village in Namibia, where they had never seen a white person, and then return after 10 years, I'm more and more convinced, having had this experience more than once, that actually tourists have created beggars in the African continent, right? And I feel actually confident in establishing this, because the difference between my first visit and the second visit, and this is something that we have then verified through more thorough research, is that in no culture, when you visit somebody, they will come and ask you for something. Wherever you go somewhere, you bring a present globally, as a global thing. You visit somebody, you bring a present, they offer you something, whether it is a coffee, whether it is sour milk, whatever it is, right? This is a global practice. So our cultural mindset has created a situation where, let's say, Western white people started traveling to global South destination, feeling sorry for those poor people, and I'm just doing the quotation marks because poverty obviously is a subject that requires much in-depth investigation. The willingness to do good and give brought us to go and visit schools, go and give pen, paper, sugar, whatever it was. Then that evolved into the process of visiting other setup, like, for instance, orphanages, or actually young generation willing to do volunteering. You know, it's part of the human goodness. What has happened that is this has evolved over years and over space. It has evolved into what in the book that I referred to earlier, we call it willful blindness. And this willful blindness is both from the tourist, who may know that is not really right, but you do it anyway because this is what is offered as part of the experience, and the recipient, because as like Rodney said, there is a lot of money involved, is a better than nothing, and they just comply with it because there is always a beneficiary and sometimes a facilitator that would actually just create that opportunity. Now, whether it is the the school, the orphanage, or whatever set up, or the individual, because in the book we looked at individual donation as for scholarship to kids in Ethiopia, for instance. And what happened was that we came up to a situation where the facilitators of those donations were earning income which were higher than a government official. Right? So these were proper jobs created by travel philanthropy and the volunteering system that was kind of creating that dependency and kind of willful unawareness or blindness to actually let it happen. And that's what probably has happened. And I don't know the Indonesian context well enough to actually say that, even if that goes into extreme situation where there is obviously exploitation, if there is sexual trafficking, whether it is whatever it is, then that becomes acceptable. And it becomes socially acceptable because if my cousin or my brother is doing it, right? And this is research done in Thailand, for instance, with the ladyboys prostitution. There is evidence that in the sex tourism industry, for instance, it's okay because my brother did, and now he owns a really nice house in Bangkok, and is now out of that system. So it becomes almost a practice thus because they don't know otherwise. They don't have anybody who said, no, that is not right. Now, from a local destination perspective, what people, and this is my argument I keep having with my African colleagues, they say to me, oh, we want to take tourists to the local school, and I just cringe, right? Very often I use the example of saying, if somebody came from from Africa in a European school, right? And they only went near the gate of that school, the police would be called upon them, right? Now, why is it okay to have strangers coming into your children's school and treating them as a human zoo, like Rodney said, and not only picking them up, taking selfies, playing with them, not knowing who these people are? Wherever you go in the world, the first thing your parents tell you, don't accept anything from strangers, right? Masood, where do you come from? Remind me.
I'm originally from Iran.
Right. What did your mom tell you when you started venturing to school on your own? Did she tell you don't accept anything from strangers?
Strangers, dangers.
Exactly. I'm sure, Sandro, with your background from where you come, your mom said the same. I'm sure, Rodney, my mom from Italy said the same thing, every single. So why is it socially acceptable to do that? So I feel that we need to really start looking in these doing good through tourism, looking at social cultural lenses that demystifies these kind of differences that we have created in our mindset. Because whether you are from Iran, Italy, Brazil, the Netherlands, or Kenya, there are certain social norms that are exactly the same. We've made them different only because we had to kind of formalize them to fit a specific purposes, which is obviously not working anymore. And so that's where I think change needs to happen. Sorry, I just went on about it because I'm really passionate about the whole travel philanthropy aspect. It's just like something that is my bread and butter on an everyday matter.
That was
very good.
Yeah. Sorry, Rodney, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just complimenting. It was very good. Adding on to my story, and indeed, we do see those norms that normal basic norms, they're becoming more vague just because the creative disruptive donor dependency by foreigners coming into local settings and telling what's better or doing things they think it's good. And it's definitely not. It's disruptive.
And
Thank
this is
you.
getting replicated in diaspora tourism a lot. You know, that's something. And, you know, in Asia, you are much more advanced in addressing the issue. In the African continent, what is happening that school tourism is actually becoming a product which is increasingly offered. So I think there is space to actually learn from each other. So having South-South collaboration in terms of bringing people together to have those conversations, and maybe even from an ECPAT point of view, you know, bringing some of those key players and really revisit those issues, because we feel we may think that they've been addressed in the past, but actually these are getting replicated more and more and more with new market coming into play.
Actually, we just did the last month we had a big meeting with Dutch NGOs that are supporting orphanages in Indonesia on the Indonesian embassy in The Hague. And there were also a number of diaspora, and actually those people that were running NGOs and sending funds, they were much more open to our story than diaspora were, because we had a real blockage, like, but I'm from there. Well, I know, but well, things evolved, and we have new knowledge. We have new lenses that we look at this issue. So let's learn together.
Fantastic. And I think I'm just mindful of the time, and I think, yeah, we're gonna stop there on that note. And yeah, thank you so much to both of you. Really appreciate your time. Really thought-provoking talks, and really well linked as well. So that was excellent, and I personally thoroughly enjoyed that, and I can see from the comments that everybody did. So thank you again for your time and for your fascinating talk. So really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Marina. Thanks, Rodney. Cheers.